If you've never worked as a software engineer, then chances are you've never seen a big code base. So today I'm going to show you exactly that. I've got a code base for a mobile app that I've been working on for a long time. I've developed this with another software engineer. We've got a few 100,000 lines of code, hundreds of different files, quite a large structure. There's a lot of different components to it, and I think you're going to learn quite a bit in this video. So with that said, let's start exploring a large code base. So I've got the code loaded here in VS Code, and I'll walk you through the overall structure and give you a sense of what you can expect as a code base gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now with that said, even though this is quite a bit of code, it's nowhere near as large as some other code bases that are maintained and developed by hundreds, if not thousands of developers. One of the code bases I worked on at my time at Microsoft was probably 200 times the size of this. So even though this is quite large, just imagine it can get much bigger than this. This is just sufficiently large enough that I can kind of walk you through what ends up happening in a large code base. So we'll dive into that, but I do want to mention that I have a free school community. This is a place where you can network with other developers. I've teamed up with a few YouTubers. So we've got myself, Kenny Gunderman, Nick White, Kevin, if you know who those guys are in the community. We're already at over 7,000 members. It's completely free. You do not need to pay for it, and you can join it from the link in the description. Anyways, let's start walking through this project. So a bit of context here, this is for a React Native mobile application for the startup that I'm currently working for. It's closed source, so I won't leak too much to you, but I can walk you through the kind of general structure. So we have a few different folders here in the root directory. We have a GitHub or a .github file or folder, where we have some workflows. This is for running automated tests, automated deployments, etc. We have a CMS directory. This is for the content management system. We have functions. This represents the backend. We're using serverless functions hosted with Firebase for this project. We have some libs. This is for some shared types and shared configuration and also functions that we use across both the front end and the back end. And then we've got the main folder here, which is for the actual application. So the React Native app that would run on your phone. So notice right away, we have kind of 4 sub projects within the main project. We could have put these into separate repos, but it made sense to kind of stick them together. Now, if we go into something like Velocity V2, the first thing you'll notice immediately is there is a ton of configuration files. And this is what starts to happen quite quickly once you have a lot of folders, a lot of files, a lot of code. A bunch of configuration is necessary to make sure that this works across all different types of devices and that you are configuring it properly for the different environments that you're running it in. So for example, if I go into env here, you can see that we have some variables for the dev environment, the production environment, the staging environment, and we need to manage those appropriately within the code and make sure when we load up the code and we're doing it in development versus staging versus production, we have the correct scripts that load everything in and give us the correct environment. The absolute last thing we want is to be running the dev environment and accidentally modifying the staging or the production database. That would be horrible, right? Now, along with all the configuration files here, things like tsconfig, React Native config, package.json, gulp files, firebase.json, we have some custom scripts that will run before we actually start executing any code. So things like generating the Google service file, parsing some game data, parsing some Xcode configuration. There's some things that we just need to do before we can start actually running the app. And I wrote these in Python rather than writing them in TypeScript. So that's the idea here. You're going to have a lot of configuration, a lot of different files, a lot of environments, and handling those becomes quite complex. Then, of course, we have our source. Now, the source is where we actually have the code written for the actual application. And inside of here, we've got all kinds of different directories to really separate out all of the different, components, use cases, systems, whatever you guys want to call them. So we have things like utilities, and within utilities, we just have one file here. We have styles. We have some base styles and a way to normalize some styles. We use Rive. This is a way to do some advanced animations. We have a Redux folder. Within the Redux, we have actions. We have unit tests for all of our different actions. Same with the reducers. We have all the different reducers and all the unit tests. Going up here, we have some files just for navigation. So how do we have the correct navigators for registration, login, authentication, etc. We have some different modules. We have hooks. So these are just React hooks that we put in their own separate folder. We have some things related to the Google services. So we need this when we're using Google sign-in and some other features. We have a folder for different games in our application. So we have the source, assets, Vite directory. We have a bunch of different components. So inside of here, we have all of the different React Native components. So we have components that are screens, organized into different subdirectories. So we have a loading screen, we have main. These are our main screens like module details, more, profile, public profile, etc. We have registration screens, again, split into login, profile, username, etc. We have welcome screen inside of its own folder. So everything is meant to be super clear and easy to navigate. So within just a few clicks, I can immediately find the type of code that I'm looking for, and I don't need to start searching through tons of different files. Now, as well as that, we've got a bunch of assets. So same thing here for the assets. We want to keep these nice and organized. So we have fonts, we have icons, we have different logos. We have some main assets like background, some module details. Now that I'm looking at this, some of this stuff could be named better. We just got a lot of stuff going on. We then have a file for an API call. I don't actually know why that's there. That should probably be removed. But the idea is everything is nice and organized. It's separated into different folders and directories, and that way we can very easily find the code that we're looking for. Now, as well as that, we even started doing some localization. So for example, if we click into here, you can see that we have all kinds of variables for the localized text and the strings that are going to be inside of our application. Right now, we just have it in English, but we knew that eventually we were going to want to add multiple languages. So we should start doing that right away so we don't have to refactor a ton of stuff later on. Now, what else do we have here that I can mention to you? I think that's about it inside of this directory, but you get the idea that there's quite a bit more than just writing in a specific framework, right? We've got a lot of scripts, we've got a lot of configuration, we have a bunch of tests, and we have scripts that will automatically execute all of those tests for us as well. For example, in our workflows here with GitHub, we're automatically running all of the tests for our React Native application, and we're not going to allow you to merge a pull request unless the tests pass. So now I guess another thing I can show you is the libs directory. So inside of libs, for example, we have a bunch of different types and some shared variables that we want to use in both the backend and the front end. So rather than copying them and having them in both the backend and the front end, we made a shared library. This is a bit of a pain in the ass to actually implement and import in both of the projects, but we knew it would be worth it because we need to have the same types shared across the front end and the backend. Pretty common with a TypeScript project. So for example, we have a bunch of different constants here, which are separated into things like enums. We have some other constants here. I don't want to share too much. We have an index file just to make this import a bit easier because we have path-based imports. And then we have a ton of different types, which again are going to be shared across the projects. I'm trying not to leak too much, but I do want to show you a bit of the code. Then if we go inside of functions, right, we have service accounts. Now we need service accounts so that we're able to actually deploy this locally. We can have different permissions based on who's actually executing this code. That's for kind of Google services, Firebase, all that kind of stuff. And then we have a ton of different functions that are called from our front end. So we have functions related to the feed. We have libs. This is actually a, I forget the name. It's some kind of link. I'm not going to get into that right now. We have things for modules. We have things for notifications, for the profile, for the registration, for social, followers, following, making posts, right? And notice for every single one of these functions we have unit tests. Now, in my case, I really like to make sure that we have unit tests specifically for everything that's on the back end, because as long as the database is consistent and we know that we are correctly retrieving results and that all the backend functions are working properly, the front end is a lot easier to test, and we're not going to have bad data being sent to the front end. So my idea in terms of getting speedier development here is we're going to make sure we test everything really thoroughly on the back end, and then for the front end, we can kind of test that later on or not be as strict because we know that all of the data is working correctly, everything's being called correctly, we have the correct error messages, etc. Right? Now that's pretty much all that I wanted to show you. Obviously I could walk through this code base and I could explain a million things and complex patterns and how to reuse code, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what it's like once you start getting into a bit of a bigger code base. You have a lot of different directories, you have a lot of structuring, you're making sure the naming is correct. You want to obviously make sure you're not reusing code, so setting up something like a shared library for different types or utility functions. You really need to be careful with the configuration, right? So how do we manage different environments? How do we store sensitive data? How do we make sure that we're not manually doing a ton of things and that everything is as automated as possible? So we're running a bunch of scripts that maybe do a manual operation that we typically would need to write ourselves or typically need to perform ourselves. How do we make sure that someone who's not technical can run the app and has decent instructions for how to do that? That's why you would include something like a README file. I think you guys get the idea here, and hopefully this video gave you a bit of value and at least just kind of expose you to what's possible once you start getting into some bigger code bases. Again, this is by no means big in consideration of all the code bases that exist, but I know a lot of you have never worked as a software engineer, or you've never even seen a code base anywhere near this size. You've worked in 1 or 2 files probably at most. So I wanted to kind of give you a taste of what it's like. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.